Welcome, everybody. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We're going to begin. We are honored this morning to, in our very clunky technological way, connecting with Jim Stowe, who is a native of Belmont, North Carolina. He and his family relocated to Montgomery County, Maryland, to serve as the fourth director of the Office of Human Rights. He's been instrumental in developing new program initiatives and repositioning the office for success in the 21st century, including areas of fair housing, new initiatives to combat the incident of hate, violence activities, bullying in schools, racial profiling, and criminal justice systems, and an increase in programming for youth. So, Jim, I hope you can hear me. I just wanted to ask you if you can tell us a little bit more from your own perspective about the Montgomery County Office of Human Rights and the kind of work that you do there.
Good morning, everybody, and I too want to apologize for these technical delays. I did a test on yesterday and everything worked fine. So again, we apologize for that. It is a great morning here in Montgomery County, and glad to be a part of this great conversation. In terms of the role and where we are here in Montgomery County, we are the civil rights organization for Montgomery County. We serve in the capacity of trying to be the monitor and the enforcer of our city rights, I should say our civil rights code here in Montgomery County. And in doing so, accept complaints along the lines of discrimination in employment situations, also in housing and public accommodations. And more, we're getting involved in issues relative to intimidation. As you might imagine, that now is an issue for which has begun to be a lot more prevalent in our community, unfortunately. And so we find ourselves dealing with issues where we have acts of vandalism, acts of intimidation and bias that are occurring more and more here in Montgomery County. So that's an area that we not glad to hear and know about, but nonetheless, it does exist. And we're trying our best to work to be a deterrent to that kind of behavior here in Montgomery County. Like Gil, those are the kinds of things we're engaged with. We also have a very robust mediation program as well that we deal with when we have concerns coming up, particularly in cases of discrimination, we utilize it as well. But also we work to sort of quell disputes that happen in the community, and over a number of groups in doing that as well. So it's a full gamut of things that we try to do and are part of here in the county.
Sounds like, unfortunately, you've been very busy lately, I'm sure. And I think one of the things that might be helpful to our group in getting to know you this morning is if you can tell us a little bit about your own personal journey and how did your own personal attitudes toward race and racism evolve over time?
The journey. We were talking about that just yesterday, my daughter and I, and she asked the question about what was the most prejudiced thing that happened to us. Both she asked it of my wife and of myself, and I had two stories that I think I want to share this morning that I think were indicative of my growing up. I am from Belmont, North Carolina, as Rabbi Gill said. Belmont is just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. To give you some context, if you've been in that part of the state of North Carolina. It's called the foothills of North Carolina. It was a community that primarily was one based on textiles. So there were a lot of textile mills in my small town. It was a big place from my perspective because I had not seen anything other than my small town. But at any rate, later on in life, it was a very small town. But at any rate, we pretty much had accepted the fact that there was black and there was white. Didn't have much else in that community. But with that being the case, there were rules that also were part of that particular system. Rules that we learned very early growing up. Rules that would include those things that were permissible, particularly when white people were engaged and were around, and those things that were not. They included things like we could not, of course, drink out of water fountains that were not labeled with the word colored in those days. We could not then ride the bus in terms of going to and from. When we did, we had to be in the back of the bus. If there were white people walking down the sidewalk, we would have to step off of the sidewalk. and let white people pass. School buses were designed for those the white schools primarily that had where most of the kids went to school, and the older buses that came to our schools that often broke down and were always a problem. And so at any rate, you get the idea that there was, in fact, this two set of standards that were probably throughout my growing up years. So as I'm sharing this with my daughter, I would remind her of these two stories that I want to share real quickly with you all this morning. And I said to her, one of the worst things in the world is to be invisible. And I was sharing with her about a story that had happened to me early in life. I'd gone to our local department store. It was Belk department store. Belk is a pretty large chain anymore down in the South. But at any rate, it was in our town, and that's where everybody shopped. And so I'd gone down there at the instructions of my mother to pick out our clothes for the school year. We would do that every year. We would get, turns out, 2 pair of blue jeans, and then we would get 3 shirts each to start the school year. And I should never forget then going to that situation, and I'd gone to the store, and I was entrusted to do that. I may have been maybe 10, is my recollection, in doing so. But at any rate, I was there with that responsibility. And so I'd gone through and gathered all of the things. And if you can imagine that, now by the time, it was 4 of us, by the way, in this group. I had 3 brothers in the same sort of tier as my age was. And there we were. And so as a result of that, I come and I get the items, and I go up to the cash register and ready to check those items out. But when I got there, there were 2 women shopping, 2 white women shopping, and of course the cashier was white. And they continued to talk. And for a 10-year-old at that point in time, hearing and standing there, it took a long time. It may not have been that long, maybe in actuality, but I stood there long enough so my arms began to shake under the pressure and the weight of the clothing. I had nowhere to sit it down. Nobody offered for me to sit it down on the counter, so I just stood there. And this conversation went on and on and on, and I thought to myself, this is after this sort of happened to me, and I told my mom about it. I said, they never even acknowledged that I was there. They didn't even ask me to set my things down. And so I thought to myself, wow, I'm a non-existent piece here. I don't exist here. And so finally, the cashier then came to me, and by that time, it was not nearly the pleasantries that she was expressing then to the 2 previous customers. I took my items, and then I checked out, and I walked home. And I thought about it all the way home, even as a 10-year-old, that something was not right about that situation. It really bothered me. And it bothered me more and more as I, in fact, get older and do the work that I'm doing. So it really, really bothered me. And that whole sense of that was just really very disturbing to me. And then the other situation, we were getting to integrate schools there in my little small town in Belmont. And I had gone to a practice of a little league football team. I didn't make the team, but I still was interested in being out there and seeing what was going on. And as I stood there, there were persons talking. There was the coach, his wife, and then another person, and the young person who a little bit older than I was. And they were talking about integrating the schools. And they would now have to go to school with N kids. And I'm standing there, folks. And so I'm saying to myself, don't they see that I'm standing here and using language like that, and they would don't have a big conversation about this terrible thing getting ready to happen to the white kids in my community. They would have to go into school with black kids, and they didn't, of course, use that word. And I thought to myself, I'm invisible. I was standing right there, and they began to have a conversation that was about people like me, but did not include me. And so my evolution in this work started with ideas and this sort of systematic understanding about who I was in the context of my small town. And the evolution has been is that I've tried to learn and understand over these many years that was a situation that was part of that system at that point in time. And it was not right. It was not something for which was nurturing. It was not something for which, in fact, I felt like a whole person as a result of all that. The only thing that saved me was sports. Sports began to be a place where we did come together as a community. And it didn't matter for those small moments for which we were engaged in the actual competition itself. But soon after that was over, it went right back to where it was. So, Rabbi Gil, it's been a real growth process for me in terms of that. I know I learn every day. While I've been in this work some 30 years, every experience is brand new for me, and I try to learn something from every experience that I have. And one of the things that I guess I want to make sure I say that this morning to us on the phone is this. Oftentimes, many of us believe that we know our stories. We believe then that we know the part about us. I mean, across racial lines, across cultural lines. And folks, we don't know those stories. And what happens so often is that when you don't listen to my stories, you don't even get a chance to actually know who I am, what I'm about, and more importantly, the very essence of who I am. Nor do I get to know you either. And so therefore, we have this non-relationship that keeps going on and on and on. And at the end of the day, we have no relationship. And so what I'm really trying to do now that this has happened to us, Rabbi Gil, I'm continuing to evolve in my own understanding about things that I work in every single day. I have issues, I have challenges with what happens and what I see and how we treat one another. But what I do know is this: if I consistently try to learn something about the person to whom I'm dealing with and listen long enough to learn one thing about him or her, maybe I can communicate better. Maybe I can be of greater assistance to them in my capacity as the director of the Office of Human Rights. Maybe I can be a better neighbor. Maybe I can be someone to whom I might be an outlet for someone that needs that outlet. It's very interesting that when we have people come from around the world here who don't know and understand how we do things or the language or those things that are part of our culture here, how sometimes insensitive we can be for people like that. It's not until you're that kind of person that you're the person to whom is not being listened to, is not being held in a situation where you can speak and be understood and be brought into the circle, that you sometimes lose sight of the fact that that could be you. I've learned then to utilize that particular gift. I think it is a gift that you understand that, everyone has issues and concerns. And when you're in the moment, when you try to work to be a part of that process and try to learn from it, you become a part of that positive moment. And that's what I want to try to do. So my evolution has been this. It's been ongoing. It's been consistent. And I try to have it open every single day. I don't know everything about this work. I don't know everything about what the people around me. And I accept that, and I try to build upon that.
Thank you. What a powerful story and incredibly powerful memories that you're sharing with us. This is so important for us to be able to hear your story and have you model for us exactly the thing that you're asking us all to do, is to listen to each other's stories as individuals and then to move from there. I think one of the things that so many of us who have white skin don't understand and haven't experienced in our lifetimes are these issues of systemic disempowerment, of having dignity stripped of us through being erased, through being asked to get off the sidewalk when a white person walks by. These are things that those of us who are, the Ashkenazi Jews, the Jews who are descended from Europeans, we have not experienced that in our lives in such a profound way and in so many subtle ways. And I think this is what's so important about when we were kids growing up and being told the story of America in our history classes, the story of Black Americans was erased as well. We learned about slavery in broad strokes, but not the stories, not the personal stories. And this is the moment in history where that all has to be rectified. I want to turn in the conversation now, Jim, to what's been going on just these past few days and what they mean in the larger context. And one of the things that I'm bringing to our conversation now is the memory of the Kerner Report, which came out in 1968. It was ordered by President Johnson in light of the riots that were breaking out in the 1960s. And one of the things that the Kerner Report found is no surprise that these riots are directly brought about because of systemic racism and white supremacy and police brutality. And there's something profoundly disheartening about the fact that report came to that conclusion in 1968. And here we are in 2020, and it seems that nothing has changed. And, you know, Martin Luther King spoke out directly against this and talked about when riots break out, that is the reaction of the unheard. So I suppose, you know, we sit here at this moment looking out at the past many, many decades, maybe centuries in this country now, and we wonder, are there reasons for optimism now? What can we learn from this moment? And perhaps is there something hopeful we can take from this moment as well?
I'm hopeful that there is some opportunities here, and I'm actually excited about some part of it, and I'm also very passionate about another piece of it that I want to share. And that really looks at and gets to the idea that much of what was discussed in that 1967 report that you speak of, and then the words of Dr. King that you shared with us from 1965. And if you were not someone who read enough of each one of those reports that would have you sort of identify the time frame, you would think we were talking about now. And indeed, Dr. King's prophecy, as it were, was that if we did not, in fact, engage ourselves in ways that we would, in fact, have this happen over and over again, were his words. And that indeed is what's happening, because we have not ever, in my opinion, engaged the issue for which keeps dragging us back to that same point in time. And that is relationships between those of us who are white in this community and those of us who are black in this community. And I mean the community of the nation, not just here in Montgomery County. And every time we've come close to trying to engage ourselves with it, we've dropped back to a point where, because of the other issues that are just as important, those that deal with sexism and ageism and homophobia and all those other things that are critically important issues, begin to come back into the mix. And we end up doing and trying to spread a very wide brush over a lot of issues and not making much progress on any of those issues. And so my whole point is that we've got to get to a point where these circumstances of today, I'm hoping we don't miss the point. Absolutely, there's an issue with police, there's an issue with minority communities, and particularly black communities. There's an issue with excessive force. There's an issue with police brutality. But clearly, the bigger point is that I firmly believe that Mr. Floyd, were he white, I don't believe that same level of treatment would have happened to him in the same exact. I reminded of the young man, I think his last name was Ruth. You may recall he was a person who went into a church, Mother Bethel, there in Charleston, South Carolina, and sat with 11 people for over 45 minutes. And in doing so, began to know them a little bit. I mentioned earlier in my comments about this idea about relationship, about talking, about sharing stories, and so forth and so on. He had an opportunity to do that. And then later killed 9 people. When they found Mr. Ruth in Shelby, North Carolina, weeks later, I noticed how they took him to the car and apprehended him. They handcuffed him, walked him to the patrol car, put their hand above his head so he would not hit his head going into the car, and then eased him into the patrol car. And I thought to myself, my goodness gracious, this man just killed 9 people in cold blood. Not that you've got to be, cruel and abusive to someone. That's not what I'm talking about. It just seemed to be a different level of treatment for someone who was the person. There was no sort of mystery around who did this. He was the person. He was the suspect. No question about that. But it appeared to be there was a whole level of treatment that was very, very different for him. And here's a man that went in and wrote a bad check. And was then apprehended for that reason, and then taken into the street. You've all seen the video, so I won't go through all that. But the point I'm making is that there was a difference in the way it was dealt with. And I firmly believe that, again, had it not been for the fact that he was black, he would not have been treated that way, not be dead today, in my opinion. And so I'm reminded of the fact that it was the audacity, it was the permission given, that was okay. That was okay to treat that person that way, that human being that way. Situation that occurred also in Georgia. involving Mr. Aubrey. Literally was corralled by trucks and vehicles for allegedly doing something for which they didn't see him do, and utilizing an issue that they called community arrest as a reason for which they were pursuing him, which, as we found out later on, did not apply at all to the situation. But nonetheless, it was okay. Something about the whole societal piece said to those individuals in those two vehicles that it was okay to do this, actually hunt down someone with these trucks and corral him, and then the altercation happened afterwards. And here is the real thing that really bothered more than anything else. There are over 1,800 police units across the United States of America. These two particular cases that I mentioned, someone captured something on a video. And what I wonder often is, what are the things that we're not seeing in those small police units? And by the way, the average size of those police units generally are 10 or less in terms of officers who police their communities. So my goodness gracious, what is actually going on out there? What's happening out there? And so by the same time, I mentioned that I have some optimism, that I'm excited about some things. Here's what's different. As I began to, by the way, one of my mentors, and I don't talk to him as much anymore, he's 95 years old, is Dr. C.T. Vivian, who was one of the lieutenants for Dr. King. And I just sometimes call up and just ask, what do you think? And what's your perspective on this? Just get a bird's eye view of what it must have been like when he was there in the early days of the civil rights movement, more importantly, how it related it to today. And what he would talk about is this issue of how people dealt with one another and how they had to really study what was going on and understand what was going on, have some idea about the times in which you were living in. And I raised that only in the context of where we are today. There was a moment when I believe that those persons who were holding Mr. Floyd down knew that at some point in time that their particular tactics might very well end in the loss of life. Because not only was the gentleman holding his neck down with his knee, there was someone about mid-torso, there was someone a little bit further down. So literally they were snuffing the life out of this human being. And so remember now, these folks are trained, so they were aware of the consequences for which these actions might in fact result. And so when it's all said and done, they literally snuffed the life and the breath out of this man, Mr. George Floyd. And I thought to myself, how horrible can that be? What happened? What was the permission given that allowed them to get to this point that they forgot whatever it was they were doing, maybe initially in putting him on the ground, to where they were literally actually murdering this person? And so that's the backdrop for which now comes the opportunity. And what's different? And what's different is this. In the streets across America, and particularly in communities where there is a very little representation of Black people living in those communities, there are white Americans, white residents, who are protesting this, who are saying that this is enough. This is gone too far. This is at a point for which we've got to do something. And I've heard so many people give me a call and say, I want to do something. I don't know what it is that I need to do, but I want to do something because this just cannot continue. This cannot be a part of that. And Dr. Vivian said to me, it was when white people came to the movement, when Jewish people came to the movement, when those who were part of the hippie movement came to the movement, when those who were songwriters and those who were people engaged in folk songs and writing of them, when they came to the movement, when clergy of good faith came to the movement, escalate to a place in a time where real change could take place. And that was the difference, because up to that point in time, it had been primarily those of us who were victims of this situation, this is what I'm talking about, that were in the streets marching. But when we became a one nation around these ideas, when folks saw those dogs attach these children in Birmingham, Alabama, folks said, that's enough. That is simply enough. And so that's what's different now. Even in the height of the civil rights movement, it was still pretty spotty with others, even though they were there. They were not there necessarily in great numbers. But what I'm seeing today, and what's exciting for me today, is that they are in great numbers, and they're in places where, again, many of us who are minority persons in this particular country are not there in great numbers. But they are marching with passion, they're marching with consistency, and it appears anyway, with the goal and aim of trying to have something happen, some action to take place. And that to me is what's exciting. That to me is what is the hope that we have, that we can turn this thing around. And so if we don't somehow never get sidetracked with just the important issue in front of us, vis-a-vis the piece dealing with police and brutality and Black Lives Matters, to get to the real issue is that being able to live in this nation of ours, where prejudice, where hatred, also the situation where we say to ourselves, has to matter. We've got to move those things out of the way. And I believe in my heart of hearts that this is the moment for which, if our white community will begin to move beyond the marches to take an action, joined in by other communities of our particular county as an example and around us, we can really begin to make a difference. And finally, and first and foremost, attack this thing called racism, because at the very core of all this is that thing that has held us back since the days of Andrew Jackson and the Black Codes and the compromise of 1877 with Rutherford B. Hayes. Folks, by the way, you need to understand this, and maybe you already know this, and that is this, that during Reconstruction, we had over 1,500 folks who were public officials. We had 2 senators in the U.S. Senate. That hadn't happened since, as a matter of fact. We had all kinds of folks in Congress in the 1870s. I mean, it was incredible. We had a chance. We had just lost, by the way, over 750,000 lives in the Civil War. And so whatever that was about before then, we had moved to a place that we were trying to start over. We were really saying to ourselves that here is a nation that is made up of all kinds of folks here for one purpose, to be able to live and be able to exercise their rights and be a part of a greater society than what was around the world at that time. And we made that pledge. And for 1870 to around 1905 or so, we were doing that. But in 1877, there was a compromise. And the compromise was based on this, that if Ulysses S. Grant was actually the president at that time, he was going out the president at that time, he began to move federal troops from the South. And the deal was made then by Republicans at that point in time, as you know, that was the party of Lincoln, at that time, to remove the troops from the South throughout. And Rutherford B. Hayes agreed to do that. And that election was decided in the Electoral College. Take a look at that sometime, you get a chance. Take a look at that. Because that began then the whole Jim Crow era. And that's what we're still trying to rebound from ever since. They've never been the same since. So we went to a place where, again, we lost over 750,000 lives. And we said to ourselves, we're starting over as a nation. We're starting over. And we got a chance to see for the first time whites and blacks were standing equal under the law, equal rights as citizens, except for women. And also the issue of equal rights as it relates then to be able to hold political office. And then in less than 12 years, it was all gone. And it's never been the same since. So that's what we're talking about. That's the opportunity we have right now. Right now, we have people who are goodwill all across this nation who are saying we can do better. We ought to do better. And now is the time to take steps and take action. So I think that's the enthusiasm that I have, that's the excitement that I have, and that's the optimism that I have.
Thank you. You know, I want to just add to that, an optimistic thought that I see as somebody who is seen as a white person in this society and as a religious leader, is I'm also seeing exactly what you've described, communities who are white beginning to do self-reflection now in perhaps ways that are deeper. Maybe it's the context of the Trump era that we're in. I know in my community, I've been writing and teaching, Jim, about the importance of us as Jews who are white to think about the ways in which we have benefited from our American experience because of the color of our skin. and in ways that I think the Jewish community hasn't quite been able to acknowledge to itself up till this point. And I think that that kind of soul searching is something that's not just happening in the Jewish community, but it's happening in white communities around the country in ways that I think are extraordinary. And the deep yearning is for us to keep this going and not just to fall back into what was before. You know, I just want to say, by the way, just a note that if you have questions you would like to ask Jim, this is the time to write them in the comments, and I will read them to Jim. But I just wanted to say, Jim, just to give you an opportunity to talk now to us, because I think something we're all thinking about is, as we are self-reflecting, and as many of us are going out and demonstrating now, what is it that we can do? What can we do as a Jewish community or as Jewish institutions to combat racism? Are there particular legislations that we need to be supporting? What kind of volunteer opportunities are there for personal engagement and action that can continue this momentum that, God willing, is the blessing that has started in response to the tragedy of George Floyd's tragic loss?
Well, first and foremost, I think one of the things that I am doing and been working with a couple of my colleagues who are in the Jewish community here in Montgomery County, I'm not so sure what happened to our relationship. Blacks and Jews have had over the years, and I'm talking about the civil rights days and beyond, before I should say, an alliance. And I don't know where that is anymore. I don't know that we have opportunities for which we are in the same space and place. And at one point in time we were. Civil rights movement is replete with persons who stepped up and made a difference from the Jewish community and were part of that process, because at that point in time, a lot of the same issues for which the Black community were in fact dealing with, so was the Jewish community, in terms of having access to resources and freedom of movement and opportunities. And somehow or other that has dissipated, and I'm trying to figure that one out. So we're talking, we're trying to find ways for which we can better coalesce here in Montgomery County, and we're talking with various religious leaders about how we can engage with each other, and there's some small things we can do in terms of working with congregations and having joint kinds of activities and those kind of things to sort of re-engage one another. And so I think that may be a large part beyond just those particular religious instances, but also great opportunities to engage each other and be in conversation. And we've got to be able to have some honest conversations sometimes, folks. And sometimes we've got to be a little more thick-skinned. Even when sometimes we have issues that people misspeak and all kinds of things are said, it's not the end of the world when those comments happen. You know, correct me, give me an opportunity to learn a little bit. But don't let that be the end of our relationship because a word was said or misspoken, or whatever the case may be. You know, we're all operating under misinformation. So one thing is to be in a position of engaging. I think that's critically important that we can do that. And the other thing I think is important that you can do is find ways to become more educated about this whole civil rights movement, and more importantly, the Black experience. And I'm talking about this specifically because there are a number of opportunities in our county. Leadership Montgomery is doing a series of trainings called Racial Equity, where they go back and talk about some of these issues, and not in a preachy kind of way, but in a way that substantiates its particular point of view through data, through information, laws that were passed, and you can see clearly the institutional references that are made as to how racism sort of got its wings and how it still exists yet today. But we learn about that. I was on a group back in Columbus, Ohio, which is where I came here from, and I understand that Rabbi Gil, you and I have a connection back then. I don't know that you were aware of that or not, but Rabbi Harold Berman is one of my best friends in Columbus, Ohio. And I understand you had a stint there in Columbus.
Yeah, I was his assistant rabbi.
At any rate, in keeping with that, we learned then that there's so many things that are going on that are significant that we sometimes don't sort of tie those things together. And I think it's critically important that we begin to do things like that, begin to have opportunities where we're engaging with one another, learning about one another. And one of the things that I did there was become part of the Holocaust Remembrance Group there in Columbus, Ohio. And I worked with persons within the Jewish community to create this chest of items that represent the Holocaust and all those things that were part of it. I had the great privilege of being engaged with a number of Holocaust survivors there in Columbus and got to really understand their stories. And I became very moved by what took place and the challenges and the atrocities that were done as part of that horrible, horrible time in our history. But I had not reached out to learn that, I would not ever have known that. And my point is that that's part of the process by which we all can do today here in Montgomery County, to know more about even the history of our own county, by the way, that has been significant in terms of some of the civil rights advances that have been made, and also some of the things that held us back. As an example, on the call with us this morning, are persons aware that there were lynchings in Montgomery County? And I can see you. Can I see any nods of those who are aware of that? Okay, there were three. There were three. Three persons in Montgomery County. Turns out that there were two lynchings that occurred in Rockville involving persons accused of doing deeds that did not have evidence to substantiate those things. But again, where mobs of folks went in and took people out of, in both cases in Rockville Jail, which, by the way, is located where our current county council building is located today. And went in and got to these two persons. One person involved in this was Mr. John Diggs and also Mr. Sidney Randolph, both who were accused of crimes that never were proven. No trial ever happened, but were hung, one about a mile away from that same location, and the other one over in the Lincoln Park area, where you know that there are a number of automobile mechanic shops, so forth and so on, right across from our metro station. That's where he, in fact, was lynched. The other lynching took place over in Poolesville. Mr. George Peck, P-E-C-K, was lynched right in front of a Methodist church. And as a matter of fact, they just took his body down on the day he was killed on the way to church that morning. This is what this was about here in Montgomery County. And so as a result of that, we have put together a group called the Remembrance and Reconciliation Commission to look at these things that took place in Montgomery County. We'll be memorializing those things and also making them a part of the process by which we, in fact, then can learn from those situations and circumstances. So stay tuned to know more about that as that comes along. But that was what we were about. That's what happened here in our own county. And so we've got to learn those stories so that we, in fact, can not only learn the facts of them, but learn the lessons of them. And so I'm hopeful that we, in fact, can do that going forward. So those are the kind of things that I think are critically important at this juncture. So again,
okay, great.
Learn what's going on. And the last thing is also to take a stand. We need folks now that when these things happen in our community that are not right, just the other day, you may have seen this or read about this. We had someone who assaulted some folks in one of our local parks here in Montgomery County, who were trying to put up signs about the George Floyd murder. It just happened. And I just knew when I was reading the story, folks, it had to be somebody who was a young person, maybe who was a little bit more zealous about his or her particular point of view. And it was not. It was a 60-year-old man who was a vice president of a corporation in our community. And not only did he move toward those who were putting up signs once he told them not to put them up, he snatched them out of the hands of the person who had the signs. And then he took his bike, he was a biker, and rode his bike and pushed against the person who actually was videotaping this whole incident and knocked the person down. That happened just 3 days ago in Montgomery County. And so these are kind of things that we're talking about that we've got to, in fact, figure out how. So we need to take a stand against things like that when they happen and be on the record as taking a stand.
Jim, one of the questions that actually is...
So, again, engage, educate, take a stand. I think it's important also that we find ourselves to a place where we learn and we listen. That's what we can do today as a Jewish community on these issues right now.
Thank you for that, for those disturbing yet inspiring words. You know, there's a couple of questions that are coming in about our local police in Montgomery County, Maryland. Have you been interacting with the police department, and how has the police department performed? And are there trainings going on to ensure that in our hyper-local communities there aren't incidences or that the police are in fact responding appropriately?
Yes, I have been in contact. As a matter of fact, let me just also give you a program note. Hopefully we'll have a little better technical piece on my end for that event coming up. On Thursday of this week, we will have all 7 law enforcement chiefs and the sheriff on a program to talk about some of these very issues that we are discussing this morning. And so the time will be announced. Stay tuned for that. It will either be 6:30 or 7 o'clock Thursday. This Thursday, that is to say, June 11th. It will be a Zoom kind of activity and also be broadcast on live. And so they would then have a better exchange in terms of questions coming in and so forth. So stay tuned for that to hear what they have to say. Again, that is the 6 police chiefs of the city of Tacoma Park, of course, Rockville, Gaithersburg, Park and Planning, also our own county police, and then Sheriff Popkin. So all of them will be on board, and of course, Mark Elrich will be there as well to kind of give you benefit of that. So we have been in contact with them ongoing. I am aware of training that's going on between the Montgomery County Police Department that deals directly with some of these issues from a multicultural perspective. They are engaged in trying to be a part of the process with the new Museum of African American History and Culture. There is a requirement now that new officers come on board, have that opportunity. They also are going to the Holocaust Museum. And so there's some things that they're trying to do to better, again, equip their officers with an understanding about the community that they are policing today. And so they are doing those kinds of things. The other thing they're doing is try to increase the work they're doing with those who may be undergoing or suffering through mental disabilities or mental sort of episodes. And so they are going through training about how we can de-escalate and better deal with those persons who may be in fact having some episodes along those lines. So there are some things being done, but here is the thing. The thing is this, is that what I'm trying to encourage them to do is make real sure we hire the right people in the first place. And here's the thing that he'll be challenge them on this coming Thursday is this, is that when these things occur, when these incidents occur, whether it be misjudgment or just an unfortunate circumstance, that there is, in fact, some response back to the community about what took place to the extent that they can. And I must tell you that in the state of Maryland, there is, in fact, a real barrier to getting word out quickly and directed to you and me as members of this community. And that is the Maryland Police Officers Bill of Rights. And what that guarantees of those that wear this protective shield in our county is they've got up to 30 days by which they do not have to, particularly if they're involved in a shooting or some other kind of incident for which they are directly responsible or at least alleged to be responsible, that they have to even testify, even to give testimony to and witness to their superiors, for example, other than a police report. And so that is not the case that I'm aware of any place in America, by the way. And so then it really hampers that immediate response to the community about what took place. And so what took place in Minneapolis would never take place here in Montgomery County, at least today, because of this police bill of rights that exists in the state of Maryland. So I think that's out there and a part of it. So we are engaged with our police. The other thing I think is important to note to them is that all of them, by the way, when I asked them to appear on this program Thursday, immediately agreed to do so. And that's a good thing. And so I think the real point that I think ought to be really that ought to come out of this is that while we're not perfect, and they're not, they are at least in the mindset of wanting to get better and be more improved as a law enforcement community. So be a part of that conversation on Thursday with your questions and know that we will continue to push on our part to make sure that we are more and more accountable as a law enforcement community.
Thank you. Another message that was sent privately, I want to post to you. It takes it into the questioning to the very realm of personal and interpersonal relationships between white Jewish people and people of color. Someone wrote to me saying, I just want to apologize to every African American I see. In particular, some of the front desk people at our building are African American, and one of them is a young man I have a very nice relationship with. What do I say to him? I don't want him to represent his race, and it's not about me and my guilt, but saying nothing seems inappropriate as well. So that's a question that some of us might have on our minds about how do we interact now, given the fact that so many of us are becoming very aware of what's been happening.
That's a great question, and one for which I'm encouraging those of us who happen to be Black, by the way, to be receptive to hear it, to be receptive to trying to have a person not someone on the field any kind of way by asking that question. And I say to you is that honesty and sincerity never fail. I just believe that sometimes you got to just take a risk and put it out there, because those who've engaged me, I have been generally, more than anything else, just overwhelmed by the risk they're taking, the courage that it takes to kind of reach out like that. There's a gentleman that I do business with, and I've never met the gentleman before, never met him. And he said to me that, he said, Jim, I had to pull off the road here. I was just thinking, and I'm just trying to reach out to people. I don't know what to do, he said to me. He's a white gentleman. And he said to me, you know, while we've never met before, I thought you were the kind of person that would be able to hear what I'm trying to say, put in words. And he asked me, he said, you know, I'm a good person. I try to do the right thing. I try to raise my children in that regard. But I know that what's going on is not right. And I'm trying my best to do something about it in the right way. So I just want you to know that I'm doing all I can to make it happen. And I hope we don't become offended by this. And whoa, wait a minute. I said to him, I said, stop for a second. I said, I am delighted and glad that you called. And I feel honored that you felt that you were in enough safe space to have that call come to me. And let me share with you what it is that you can do. Let me share with you this from my perspective. And by the way, there is no right or wrong here. This is just Jim Stowe's perspective. I said it to you all this morning as well. I'm not giving you the way. I'm just talking about some ways, some options, some thoughts that you might have to consider. But the conversation ended with he and I like this. You know, I said to him, you do all you can do, I'll do all I can do. I'm going to get better just because we're trying. And that's what I think will happen when you engage that person at the front desk. I think if you've got a bit of a relationship already, you build upon that, and you ask for his understanding about these kind of things, and just ask about his story if you have not done it already. And ask him to help you understand how it feels when these kind of things happen to you. Or have they ever happened to you? Because I should tell you that every Black person has not had a bad experience in this country. So I think this is not sort of monolithic kind of thought process. But very clearly, those of us who are in my age group, and I'm in that 60 age group, you know, it's been my experience. I will tell you this, however, my son is in Los Angeles, and he's in the film industry out there. And he said to me that Dad, and heretofore we've not always agreed about this point. He has seen the world a lot more liberally than what I've been able to tell him exists. And so he said to me recently, he said, you know what, Dad, there is not a single Black person in my organization. There's not a single Black person in any of the executive ranks, or any person of color. And he had never heretofore ever said anything about that, ever, to me about that. So even, he's 30, by the way, he's 30 years old. And so now his group, his age group is beginning to understand that this is still in place. There's still something going on that we should have ended a long time ago. So it is happening cross-generationally, and it is occurring, people trying to deal with it. So there is a need for conversations. I would encourage you to ask that question, to engage in that conversation. And by the way, don't be dissuaded by one bad experience with somebody. That's not the one person. That's not the entire race of people. It's not the entire community. It's not the entire folks that you're dealing with. You know, go to the next person, whomever it may be. If you genuinely, again, really focus on changing your own ability to understand issues, then go a step further. Go to the next person. I'll tell you what I did. I can share with you. I've been with all kinds of people, and I've learned something every single day. Because I know, and here's the other thing about it is, I'm real sure about what I don't know. I'm real sure about that. And as a result of that, It allows me to learn more about what it is that I need to know or want to know.
This is spectacular advice, and I think it's something that every one of us are able to practice, which is, and it really is a kind of a spiritual practice. It is the ability to muster the courage to reach across the perceived divides and to ask questions and to express our honest yearnings and feelings toward each other and to listen to each other. I think that that is one of the most powerful things that we can do. So thank you for helping us to understand that and to give us that permission. And you also raised another important point that I want to reflect back, which is that sometimes people who are in privilege tend to oversimplify the other and to see them as one monolithic group and to have an interaction with one person somehow define the entire group. And this is an opportunity for us to think about how this is individual to individual, step by step, human being by human being. We build new ways of understanding the world together. Thank you for that. There's another question that has come through. It says, what are the ways we should be listening to Black leaders and recognizing the leadership of Black organizations while owning and taking responsibility for racism as a white problem?
What a great question. I think, again, trying to make real sure that we do the same sort of due diligence as we might do for other kinds of things we have an interest in. Know the issues yourself, have a perspective on them yourself, so that when you hear leaders of any particular persuasion, that you have some sense about what it is that they're talking about, at least have a perspective on that. And so when you see and hear these other points of view, you have the ability then to figure out kind of where you are with those things based on what this new information you have coming in from a Black leader as an example, and what I've done in my own reading, my own research, my own probing around for the information. Because right now today, there's absolutely nobody who has any excuse for not knowing about how to ascertain information. Now, you've got an issue with what information is correct now to kind of worry with now anymore, but in terms of it being available and accessible to persons, it is out there. So we all can do better at trying to move beyond just what we hear on the television or what we in fact hear through some other means, local news or what have you, of testing the ground ourselves. And even what I've said today, I'm hoping that you all will go back and check what I've said, fact check me, to make real sure then that the information I'm giving is in fact reinforced by actual data and the actual information itself. And so I think that's one of the things that we can do going into those situations and understanding about that. And at the end of the day, before we can move toward changing something, we've got to accept the fact that there is, in fact, a need to do so. That I, in fact, own this situation, own this, my piece of this problem. It's not all the problem of the white community. I want when you leave here this conversation to be saying that that was the case. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is that there is a role to play by the white community that maybe it has not heretofore really accepted in full. And not until you accept in full that there is an issue with it, can we move toward trying to resolve it and to act upon it in meaningful kinds of ways. And I think that's where we are, and the important thing about that has to happen. And so when we hear information come from Black leaders, from Black organizations, we can involve ourselves. And it is interesting. Today, NAACP was started by a Jewish man. And today, there are very few Jews involved in NAACP. Why is that? I don't get that. I don't understand that. And so what I'm saying, I don't know where this disconnect happened. And had it not been for the Jewish community forging so many things along the lines that I'm talking about, race relations, we would not be where we are today. But something happened. And so I'm saying we got to re-engage. And so that's one organization in and of itself that people can join today, get a membership today, and become a part of more actively and engage in that process about how we're impacting Montgomery County. And I think that's one of the ways I think we can go forward that will be meaningful and that's doable. So you can take then your own study, the words you hear from our leaders that come here and about, and then engage in things which you have a traditional sort of stake in, organizations, etc., that are part of your community, and become a part of it. Learn about those things. I mean, all those things are important. And don't forget, I should tell you real quickly the story about I was at recently the Jewish Center, and I always kind of get it turned around because it's called different things, different places. This was just after, I don't know if it was the Pittsburgh incident that happened, the horrible thing that happened there, or it was something else. We've had too many of them. within the Jewish community last years, a few years or so. But I was there to show my support. And I'm sitting there, folks, and I see some movement up front. I'm about halfway back, and if you get in the part where the basketball courts are in the center, is where this was being held. And I'm about 3/4 of the way back, and I hear some movement up front. They announced that Ike Leggett is in the room. Let me say it again. I'm about 3/4 of the way back. I hear some movement in the front, and the person goes to the podium and says, "We're pleased to have Ike Leggett in the room." Ladies and gentlemen, I am 6'5". You can't see me. I'm 275 pounds. Ike may be, on his best days, maybe 5'8". And looking at him, I suspect he's probably about, maybe I'm going to give him about 160 pounds, maybe a little bit more than that. And I thought to myself two things. One is I've got to get more involved with the Jewish community, number one. That's what I thought about. And number two, come on, gang. We don't all look alike. And goodness gracious, that's not even close. That's not even close. Again, 6'5", 5'8". Come on. And so I thought to myself, we can do better. Now, and I think we, because I too, okay, maybe I'm not been around enough in the various synagogues and so forth to be someone that may be more present and more recognizable. But clearly, that's what I'm talking about. We've got to get to a point where we are really engaging with one another. And so I would say then, I guess again, to that person who asked this question, that whole experience of guilt is not what I'm talking about. I don't need you to do that. Don't spend any time dealing with all that. Spend time really talking about now, how do I get re-engaged in the community I live in today? Someone once said to me, you know, I'm not prejudiced. I don't see colors. Come on, give me a break. How can you not see my color? Again, I'm 6'5". You have to see that now. You may see some other things going on that are not too pleasant right now. As a matter of fact, I'm wearing today because I'm not able to get to a barber shop my 1960 haircut. So you can see a lot of things going on. But the point I'm making is that you have to see. So see me first, and then can you then begin to see places that are more important than just the outside covering. That is my heart. That's my character, which I hold dear. All those things is not what you can see, but you got to see me first. I think it's critically important that we in fact recognize that.
Jim, I think you know, I want to respond to a question you've asked, which is what's happened to the Jewish community and its sense of unity with the Black community and communities of color. I'm going to say something that I think some people are afraid to maybe say, which is I think in the Jewish community there are a lot of people who have a lot of anxiety around a perceived anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sensibility in the Black community. And one of the things that I have been trying to teach, and I will continue to teach in my community, is the idea that just as it is with individuals, it's also true with groups, that even though there are voices that may be anti-Semitic in the Black community, that doesn't mean that we have to not listen to leadership in the Black community and the leadership of Black organizations and the struggles against racism in this country, which are all about the struggle for justice for all human beings ultimately, and partially, I'm going to say it, I think that there's a certain degree of racism amongst some groups of Jews who use that as an excuse to not listen to Black leadership at all. And so I think that there is a lot, there's a lot of layers to this, and there's a lot of complexity here that I think we all have to learn how in a Jewish community to silence and still our own anxiety long enough just to listen to the whole picture of the many, many different kinds of voices that are out there in the Black community in America, so that we can once again regain the trust and build the bridges and the relationships that we all need together in order to move this country forward. I want to ask another question that got posed, which is, are there any activities, social action, or particularly, are there any organizations of people of color that are local that you know of that we as a synagogue community can partner with or reach out to build more meaningful and ongoing relationships with?
I think that the one that comes to mind. I've already mentioned, and that's the NAACP, which has the history that I mentioned before.
Right.
And that is a local organization that in fact has opportunities for greater engagement by the Jewish community. There are those that are doing some pairing with other congregations that are Black in the community. I've got at least one that we're working on now who has asked for some help in trying to identify a partner, and so we're trying to get those folks together and have that conversation, see if that might be meaningful to work as a opportunity. There are a number of issues that we're dealing with in the health community. There's an African American health program that is fully functioning right now, and that's a whole other issue of the disparities that exist. And it's interesting that in the current pandemic, that African Americans are being disproportionately affected by the disease, both in terms of the occurrence as well as the testing positive and as well as the deaths are concerned, which points at the issue of pre-existing conditions, not just medically, but also in terms of economically. And because, again, we know then that the poorest of us don't always avail themselves to the best healthcare opportunities, particularly as it relates then to preventive medicines. And so all those things are part of the process that go in hand. And so it's really clear that there's an opportunity to really have some reinforcement there. Right now in Montgomery County, here, a Black man specifically is living 7 years less than any of his counterparts living in Montgomery County. So that means that as long as I stay here, I'm going to be, at least the projection is that I'll lose 7 years of life here because of the conditions facing those of us who are Black men. So those are conditions for which there ought to be a concern within the Jewish community about that particular thing. Because I talk often with our folks over at the Jewish Family Services, work very closely with them, Dave Gans over there, and doing a lot of work with them and what they do because they've served our entire age community, but at the same time have obviously done a lot of work directly with the Jewish community as well. And so there are avenues for which we engage ourselves. And again, why am I over there? Why am I doing that? Because it affects the community. And so I say the same thing to you. Why are you over here? It affects the community. And so find ways that where there may not be a natural carve out for you because you come from a Jewish perspective, that shouldn't, in fact, discourage you from getting involved and being a part of that particular and learning more about it because it impacts the whole. It's part of the whole community that we're talking about, trying to develop and be a part of. And so I would hope so. And I should tell you too, we may not be able to align ourselves on issues that we have individually or as different communities. You know, I may not ever understand the extent to which the Jewish experience occurs both back home and here. But there are issues that we can in fact share. And I'm just suggesting that we find ways to coalesce around those issues that impact all of us. And those are things for which I believe bear comparison and very important results and outcomes for the entire community. So I'm saying whatever level of interest that you have in the Jewish community, that same interest, I suspect, exists in a broader community as an example, and find ways that you can incorporate yourself in those areas. I would also suspect Interfaith Works is another place where I think you find an opportunity to look at those who help with augmenting human services for the poor and for the underserved and for the homeless is their chief charge. And I work with them as well and trying to kind of figure out how we can incorporate what we do from a human rights perspective and what they do in terms of human service perspective. So there's an avenue there for folks to get involved and get engaged. And maybe you may already be, which is great, but expand that as we go forward. So those are things that I would say to you, these are not mysteries, by the way. These are not new ideas, by the way. But they are things that probably, because they don't have a Jewish maybe bent to them, maybe you're not thinking about them in that way, I'm saying remove that. Because if it affects the community in a way for which it can be made more positive by your engagement, by your skill sets, by what you bring to the table, then my goodness, why not offer that?
This has been an absolutely wonderful conversation this morning. There's so many more questions. I just want to point out there are questions we're not going to get to today, but questions around education, questions around educating the law enforcement and what kind of curricula there should be, questions around the status of social justice and racial justice education in public schools. And a very compelling question is integration of public schools still as important as it was, as important today as it was in 1954? These are all incredibly powerful questions and when you see it in light of, you just brought up the issue of healthcare and the disparity of access to healthcare and the higher incidence of COVID deaths in the Black community. All of this is, you know, for so many of us, it is just overwhelming. It is overwhelming, these disparities, these systemic problems that are here. And yet, here we are at this moment, Jim, you and me and all of us gathered here, we are meeting, we are reflecting, we are telling our story, and we are thinking about what we can do. And I just want to close with a teaching from our rabbis in Pirkei Avot. When life seems like it's more than we could possibly do, we say, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It's not on you to finish the whole task. V'lo ata ben chorin lihitbatel mimena. And yet, you are not free to desist from working at that task. The task may be greater than any of us can achieve in any given moment, but we have to still keep plugging away, issue by issue, individual by individual. And thank you for being such an extraordinary inspiration to us, Jim. We are so grateful that you are here with us in Montgomery County here in Maryland. And we hope we can continue to turn to you for your advice, for your insight, and for your support as we are all struggling together in fighting the scourge of racism in this country. Thank you so much, Jim.
Rabbi Gil, thank you, and to all of them on the phone this morning. I really appreciate so much. And I hate, like everything, you can't see me, but as soon as we can gather together in the same place, I look forward to doing that and sharing more with you. And please, you can also help me. When you see that I can use advice and information, or maybe misstep it, I would appreciate beyond measure your willingness to come to me and just give me benefit, your thoughts, your ideas, your insight. I always want to grow. I want to grow as long as I can possibly do that and learn more and be a better public servant to you here in this community.
Amen. And may we all learn from your example, and may we all be willing to accept insight on how we can all grow. And thank you, even though there were limitations, your voice rang out loud and clear, and that's the most important thing of all. So thank you, Jim, and thank you everybody for being here and participating today. Have a wonderful day, everybody.